I am so excited to welcome onto the First Time Facilitator podcast, Phil Brown. Phil, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leanne. I'm excited to chat.
Excited to chat now.
No doubt, yeah.
That's right. And for those listening, there'll be a bit of familiarity on this call. Phil and I recorded a conversation for his podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I just wanted to keep chatting to him. So selfishly, just reached out and said, let's continue this conversation. I think first-time facilitator listeners will really enjoy it. So Phil, for those without the background on who you are, can you please share a bit about your experiences and what led you down the path of choosing facilitation as a career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from England and now work in the US. But I originally started as a high school teacher. That was where I was thinking I was going, into formal education in that regard. And I have a degree in English literature and sports science, like very focused towards I was going to either teach English, I'm going to teach phys ed. I'm going to double down on two different topics there. And it was not until I came out to the States for a summer camp experience. I think it was my last year in college and university. And people came around and offered the opportunity to work at summer camp. And I thought, this would be good for me being a teacher. Like I could work with people outside of people I'm normally around. This would be awesome for the resume. I came to the States and realized that, wow, really do I love working outside with people, and or do I enjoy working on team development stuff and making better people, better teams, more cohesive teams, connection. All that stuff was there at summer camp. And they had a challenge course, a ropes course. And that's where they did a lot of their programming when it came to team development. We'll take this group, this cabin group, out to a course, and then they'll have an experience. And so we were there just facilitating experiences. And I just fell in love with the idea of taking a group of people who didn't know each other or possibly did know each other and having an outcome where they have this realization about something, about themselves, about the team. And you had like just wonderful, and it's not selfless. It's, there's some selfish parts of that. I just loved that idea that I was imparting that there'd be these stories that people would share. And I had some sort of part to that. I facilitated that in some way. And I was very fortunate that the camp had year-round programming. So I didn't have to necessarily leave. I did the first summer, but I came back and then managed to get an extension on my visa that was sponsored by the camp. And I ended up staying at that same spot for 7 years.
Wow.
Doing outdoor education, experiential education, and taking school groups at the time, out into the woods and allowing them to learn from an experience. And so that was the experience of being outside and facilitated all that. And then it was through doing that I found that this was actually a field. I never really knew it in England. We don't have summer camps, so that was kind of a new idea in itself. And the idea of facilitating, I'd learned how to teach, but this was different to me. This wasn't like imparting knowledge. This was guiding people in a discovery of knowledge. Like they were learning, and I gelled with the idea. I also reflected that most of my life I've learned from experiences, and I remember moments where someone has helped me learn and had that really great teacher mindset of guiding people to the learning and not necessarily telling people this is what you need to think. So I just resonated with me in a big way. So when I realized I could do this for a living, that's why I ended up staying in the States. And I got some formal training, and now I work for an organization called High Five Adventure, which is based in Vermont. And I travel the Northeast in the country, teaching people how to be better facilitators. And that's now what I get to do for a living. I teach this. So it's very, very exciting to me.
I've got to ask, I love that story. I've got to ask though, were there any moments where you're like, I've done all this work, I study these degrees, and like, yeah, how did that come up with your folks or just people that were close to you? And you're like, well, I'm actually just doing this now.
Yeah, I think that there is, the good thing is there's alignment in that I was going to become a teacher. So I can still equate, like the elevator speech of what I do is very, very challenging. Like to explain to my parents still what I do now, I can try to describe all the tools that I use and methodologies that I apply, but really, I think that I can just say I'm a teacher still. And so all of that stuff that I took, I'm able to still align with the work that I do. There was a huge shock. I was the first person in my family not only to leave the country, but to leave my hometown. We were a very hometowny group. So big step to take that leap to do that. But I certainly wouldn't look back on it. And I think, I think that there's a good parallel between some of the stuff I was doing then and the stuff that I'm doing now. And I think that really gels with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting how you got your start through summer camp. And yeah, in Australia, they don't really do it either. I remember when I was young reading like the Babysitters Club and they were talking about these summer camps. I'm like, what is this? And also your experience with high ropes. And that was my sort of taste of facilitation. I was playing netball very competitively and we had like an institute program where we had to go away and we were climbing ropes, which I'm useless at. But it was a debrief afterwards and that talking about the group process that, even as a 15-year-old, I really remember and go, I'd love to be that type of person. But like you, Phil, I didn't know that was a facilitator. And there's nothing in career guides about going into this type of work. What else I love about what you're sharing is you're helping people discover. So it's through the experience that people are learning. And we're all very familiar with that 70-20-10 framework, and that 10% is the formal stuff. So can you share with me how you work with teams to get these experiences? Why do teams sort of come to High Five and to you? What outcomes are they after? And how can you help facilitate that discovery for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Our motto at High Five is connect, empower, lead, be the example. And the main focus on that is connection. There is a phrasing in experiential education called connection before content, which is you want to connect a group you work with before you ever give them any content. And I really like that and I resonate with that. What I found is that the stuff that I do is the connection is our content. And I think that that's where I think people get really excited to work with us because we're very connection focused, realizing that we want to spend the time on forming bonds and connecting and creating relationships with the individuals that we work with and anyone in those individual groups. That's how people get past some of the barriers they might run into with a lack of trust, lack of communication on an organizational level, on a sports team level. That's what happens when they lose. If they lose, often their conflict is centered around the fact that they don't really know each other. And so now they don't have the empathy for each other and they aren't able to empathize. So we have a range of people that come to us. We have youth programming that we do. So we do a lot of team development with youth, future leader kind of emerging leader kind of work. We also work with team development organizations. So organizations that are focusing on either teaching it, team development, and that's where that training comes in, or they're actually coming to us specifically for us to work with their teams. And then we also do certification and actual practical training on the challenge course side of things. So not only do I teach people how to facilitate, I also teach people how to safely operate those technical skills. So I spend, in the warm weather months in the States, I spend a lot of time in a harness because I'm teaching people how to belay and all that kind of stuff. So there's that balance between all of those things. So lots of people come through different avenues, and often we've found that people know us through one of those, right? So challenge course people, they think we're challenge course people. And
Yeah.
the facilitation people know us as the facilitation trainers. And the team development people go, oh yeah, they're the team development people, but they don't necessarily know we do all of those parts. So it's pretty good for me because it varies my work year. Like my schedule does often change and adapt. I think the tether that combines all of that is that connection, but also everything we do is educational focused. We don't, if people are listening and they think, oh, zip tours, or I'm going to go to a place, I'm going to pay some money and do this pay for play kind of stuff. That's not us. We're not the amusement park world. We use challenge courses and adventure programming as just another tool for facilitation to hit some of the goals that people have when they come to us. And they could range from, connecting more. They could be focusing on, it could be a problem that they have in their group, that they're working on communication and trust and all those components. Or it could just be that they want to bond and connect more. And that's always our theme, connection.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my number one theme as well. I think you asked me on your podcast and I said the exact same thing, connection before content. So it's a wonderful slogan. I've got to ask you, because you've been in the game for so long, have you noticed shifts in the way that the work that you do is being received? What I mean by that, like 1980s, 1990s, when people say, oh, team building, we'll do a ropes course, there's a kind of like people kind of roll their eyes and think, oh, how is this going to be applicable? But now it seems that people are leaders, teams are understanding that stuff actually works. Have you noticed a shift in that, or is that just my perception of what's the market sort of looks like?
Yeah, I think there is being a much more there's much more acceptance to the idea that it's an essential part, right? Like it used to be that there was an addition. If you had some excess funds, let's spend a day doing something fun.
Yeah.
And sometimes we get tied to like things like paintball trips and all that kind of stuff, which I don't personally think is team building. I think we should get in a better definition of the difference between team bonding, team building, and team development. I think those are three separate entities, and I
Wow.
think it's important that people identify what those are. I'm completely fine with a paintball thing saying they're a team bonding experience. Absolutely. Is it team building? I hesitate to think that's the case. It's certainly not team development. They're really not focusing on what is the long-term goal of this team. So I think maybe there's even like an immediacy factor to each of those as well. Like team development has multi layers to it. You're going to be focusing on multi days. It might be a year. Maybe team building is you're spending a full day on the specific task. Maybe team bonding is a short experience together. That I'm over maybe simplifying, but that resonates as I'm saying that stuff with me. But I think that there's more acceptance to the idea now of doing kind of like team building experiences. I was actually yesterday I was brought in to a college in the States to talk about experiential education and the career paths. And one of the students asked the question, have you ever had an experience where you were facilitating and the group just didn't like it at all and just completely shut down?
Great
And
question.
I actually said that I've never actually had a complete shutdown. I've had moments where the group isn't liking what I'm doing in the moment, but I think that the possibly an experience where that would happen is due to the facilitator not really doing a really great job of facilitating an experience. If you've had a whole day and that's a big day of flopping, that's probably indicative of maybe that you've maybe made some error. I think that what that's where I get excited about the future of the industry as well and future of facilitation. I'm seeing a lot of good professionalism in the field. And I think that means like people are taking it seriously. So if we as individual facilitators take our role really seriously and we truly think that what we do is really important, like I certainly do, and I know that you do as well, then we work really hard to make itself more legitimized, right? You want it to be seen as really serious. And so I think that I've seen a lot of people do that, and it's grown beyond that. When I first started, and this will be the same for a lot of first-time facilitators, is you're just going to want to get experience, and so you're going to end up taking jobs in summer camps, like I did, outdoor ed sites. And what I found is a lot of those will do team building sessions that are 1 hour, like a short little thing, and then you'll just do a range of games, and you'll do the same games every single time you do work with a group. They're the exact same ones that everyone learns at the start. I'll throw out some names like helium hoop or helium stick as an activity.
Yeah.
There are certain activities that I've seen everywhere that they're always the same. Once you get more experience, you add to that repertoire, and then you dive deeper into the meaning of why you're doing the activities in the first place. So as a facilitator, you kind of develop. And I think that that's what I'm seeing in the field to a degree, is there's a lot more people taking it really seriously and adding that expertise and experience to make it a much more viable experience and field. And that will only serve everyone. So that's why I love that you're doing this podcast. That's why I enjoy doing the podcast I do. It's all about like trying to share that this is a field, right?
Yes.
So that people know it's there. So they're not in positions like me who didn't know it existed and kind of fell into it. And then they can spend a long time cultivating themselves to get to a point where they can be really, really good facilitators. And that only benefits the field if you have this really high bar of facilitation. And it isn't, which I think my concern is, it isn't a career where it's a really hard to get in. And so lots of people leave. I have so many facilitator friends who gave up because there's just not that, there wasn't that much work opportunity. There wasn't the ability to make this a full-time career for them in the time, in the moment. And so those people who I think fight to stay in really do, there is a bit of a fight to stay in. So I kind of went on two different tangents there, but that's sort of like in the field, I feel like it is becoming more legitimate, and that's awesome.
Yes, I was actually talking to what you were saying about friends that have sort of dropped off in terms of facilitation. There's a lady that I know, she's a director now, but she loved facilitation. She would do it all the time, and she was like just working with these great organizations. But it came a point where she's like, I was just exhausted, like having to step up every day, be that person and deliver and manage this group. And I just thought it was easier just hopping behind the screen again. And so that might be another reason as well. But I just want to get back to your point on segmenting that team framework. So bonding, building, and development. I think it's really important to be really clear about that. And I love that you talk about sort of the time and the process related to each one. And I think you're right. I think people often mistake bonding, like going for a few drinks. That's a bonding experience, absolutely. But is it building? Is it developing the team? No. So love that distinction. I think you should create some IP or trademark that. And the conversation that we have that we're sort of just alluding to here is the way that you explain what you do to your parents is like, oh, I'm a teacher, I'm an educator. And it all comes back to that word facilitation. Now, this podcast is called First Time Facilitator. If you were to look up the word, it means so many different things, like clinical health have facilitators. You have conflict facilitators. Yeah, and what we do, it's very powerful in what it can help leaders and teams do. So what do you think is, do you think the word is accessible to everyone? Do you think people know what it means? Because you studied English, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, my opinion is that it doesn't do a good job of explaining. And I don't particularly think it's it's accessible. You know, there's an analogy that I've used, and if anyone listens to my podcast, Vertical Playpen, I've mentioned this a bunch, and so I've had to try to stop mentioning it as much as I do. But I use a Harry Potter reference, and that is like people don't really know what our field is like, what our work is like, until they walk through that door, walk through that wall, and then they see it. So I refer to people who don't know about facilitation, experiential ed as muggles. And once they have stepped in it, they understand the magic. But the problem is, how do we ever get them to the point? You know, muggles don't know that there's magic,
No,
and they know to look for it, right? So
no.
I think that's an issue sometimes when we use the word facilitation. I think it's a little bit of an inside term. And we noticed at High Five we had a program called the Advanced Facilitation. It was Advanced Facilitation Skills. That's what the program was called. It was a multi-day program, and we would struggle to fill it. And we would be like, why is this such a struggle to fill? We changed the name and it filled.
What did you call it?
We took out of the word facilitation, and we just put education, and we just put advanced education skills. And I think that, and then we were also really prescriptive in the descriptions. We said you're going to focus on how to frame an activity, how to lead an activity, and you're going to talk about how to debrief, reflect, all of those things. We mentioned all of those terms. That's another thing, right? Debrief, reflection.
Yeah.
There's a lot of terms for all of the things that we're kind of doing, and we kind of interchange them as best we can. But I'm not sure we need to come up with something new. I honestly don't know what the answer is to this, other than maybe reaching out to those we work with and trying to figure out what terms they use. Because if they're using a term, like we work with a lot of school-based educators, so we'll use the word education because it just makes sense. Educators make sense. We tried at a stage to think of the word practitioner, but found that that's also in like yoga and massage therapy practitioners and all that kind of stuff. So that didn't really work out for us either. So I'm not entirely sure and sold on what the answer is. I do think that in my head, there's two options. Either we try to adapt to what other industries do, or we do a better job of promoting the words that we're going to use and say it outside of our bubble, right? Because we keep it in-house, that's only going to keep people in-house. But if we mention outside of it, you know, we currently run into the issue at High Five that we have the word High Five, we have the word adventure in our name, in the organization name, and it puts a perception into people's brain. It puts an image in their brain of like whitewater rafting, kayaking, skydiving when you think of adventure. And that's not what we do. So we have to work hard to try to explain what we do. We term adventure as an experience that's new to you, that you've never had before, that's often getting you out of what's called the comfort zone into a stretch zone. That is has some learning outcome to it. And what often we have to do with groups is we bring a group together, and the first question I ask is find a partner and define the word adventure. Just have a conversation. What do you think it is? Define it. And normally they're in the definition, they'll bring out all of these terms.
Yeah.
But they will use sometimes the examples of whitewater rafting. And I think that that's the problem. Once again, adventure doesn't necessarily summarize what we do for a job. So I'm not entirely sold on what the answer is. I just know that I've noticed that it is a bit of a barrier sometimes when we're trying to get beyond our current industry and spread out. And especially now we're getting into the virtual world a little bit more. And the accessibility of the world. It's made the world smaller, so we have accessibility to a larger group of people. How do we phrase it? How do we turn what we do to meet a larger audience rather than the small audience we're already existing in? So, yeah.
Well, at least with our podcast, we're working on it, right? We're trying to build this because it's just absolutely, I just look around and I think how applicable and useful are the skills that we develop in our roles to anytime you're talking to more than two people, you're facilitating a conversation. Anytime you're trying to make a decision, it's like you're bringing in these skills. They're so handy. So we just need to maybe demuggle-lize the world somehow, one conversation at a time.
Yeah, I've been terming myself as I've been, and I have also a title of trainer. So that's another one of those like names that puts out there, and people don't really know what I do, and they think maybe I'm
personal trainer or
physical trainer or something like that. Yeah, so they're not entirely sure on what I do there. But I've been calling myself now an experiential trainer because I do like the term experiential. I think it's broad also, but I think it applies to everything we do. Essentially, it's a learning through experience model. Experiential education is a studied model that has practices and ideas and methodologies behind them. And I think that they can apply to some of the work we do. So I've been using the word experiential more, but I do think that it's just the more we use terms, the more they're going to be heard. So the more they're going to get out there. And I think it goes into the legitimacy piece that we talked about prior.
Yeah.
Like the more we do this stuff, we'll probably have 10 years down the line, if we continue to use those terms, it will be a term, right? Like we can't expect things to be ingrained immediately in people's heads that we can say it and they get it. I once did a workshop, and when I was an outdoor educator, we were called naturalists. So we were teaching people about the outside, so nature. Which funny enough, that I used to make me giggle because it's very close to naturist.
Yeah, so, I know, that's what I was thinking as well.
Yeah, exactly. I put that into the brain. But I did a workshop that was called Naturalists, Where Do We Go From Here? And the notion was exactly what we're sort of discussing, but in that nuanced field, and that's very applicable to our stuff, is that as a school-based educator, you could be like an English teacher, and you could retire as an English teacher. You would have no necessary desire to become a principal of that school or a headmaster of that school. You don't need to be the leader. You can stay in that role. You'll get a responsibility increase and all the different benefits you get from that. And it's a career. In our field, and that you represented with your friend who left facilitation to go behind a desk, I'm not sure there's the same amount of growth that can happen in our field. And so that's why I think we lose people. But that's how we'll get more legitimacy. If we can create a pathway of progression of an emerging professional. So first-time facilitators, where's the end, right? What's the end result? Because I'm going through this. I'm in my 30s. I've been in the field for about 15 years. And so, I'm loving the work that I'm doing, but there's always that mindset of like, where's the future for me? Can I continue to do the work I'm doing right now? I think that that's possible. And I always have my mindset that I'm going to retire at High Five. I really do love the org and the work that it does. But I think the industry needs to have a set pathway, a progression for people to create more legitimacy and make it seem like this is a career, right? Rather than just a job that I'm going to do in the moment and it's great experience. And then I'm going to use my skills and I'm going to go off and do something else, which I've seen a lot. Like, I want people to do what we do for a living, and there's enough work. There really is. It's broad, right? So we can find the work, but how do we get this career to be larger than what it currently is? Maybe it's a case for making more facilitation stuff, talking about a pathway, a career pathway, in some way about how you do that. And and
it's such a good point, because the reason why I left my old job was because I'd facilitated everything in that organization. Like I'd run leadership workshops all over the world. I'd facilitated the exec team strategy day, and it's like, where else can I go now without becoming the talent management manager, which was just 12 hours of meetings every day and just bureaucracy. So that's why I sort of left, because I wanted the variety. But you're right. It's like, okay, you facilitate these great workshops. Do you go deeper on a subject or a process? Do you then scale a business? It's really interesting. Like, where do you go from there? And like, what is the next level? I don't know. Very good point. No one's brought that up before in terms of retention of the great people that we've got in this field. Good thinking. Now you are, I was going to ask, you are an outdoor educator. I've got to ask you, what's going on with virtual? Like, how have you adapted to that, given that the nature of your work is people together, working together?
Yeah, I think that there was a huge grieving process at the start. Like there was a look at all the things that I do and check off all of the activities, all the things I would normally facilitate and realize I can't do a lot of those. But there's also been incredible innovation. And I think that that's another thing exciting about the industry right now is I think to a degree, maybe we got a little lazy because things were the way they were and we knew the business was what the business was. And I have been excited because I think that the potential for grow in the industry, making more people aware is now in the virtual setting. And I have found that I actually enjoy Zoom to a degree. Right. I do get there is a point where I've had after meeting and I'm done.
Yeah.
But I don't think I'll do another normal phone call with an actual phone with a client. I think I'm more likely to do a Zoom one because the interaction with the face to face and seeing someone is still there.
Yeah.
And I think there's still a lot of positives. The good thing for us is that even though we did do a lot of work outside, and our challenge courses we build are all outside, those things can be adapted. You can still be outside, masks, distant, and still do that kind of programming. And we actually had a couple of successful workshops called Gathering Again, which is that mindset of bringing everyone to get back together. And how do we do that? We actually got two workshops. One is an in-person one that focuses on activities, and then the other is also in person, but about challenge course operation. So we were able to do that. But then our other part of our business has always been about facilitation. And virtual is just another medium or another way that we can still do all the work. So everything is transferred pretty well. There's adaptation to activities, and that's been exciting. And we've come up with new stuff. And we have on our website a bunch of virtual activities, or virtual workshops now we're offering. So we are delving into teaching this stuff now on a virtual platform. It's taken us a while to get there, but with a lot of the stuff that we produce at High Five when it comes to team development programming, we spend a lot of time making sure it's really good before we put it out.
Cool.
There has been tons of people who have put stuff out, and that's all been really great. We just wanted to make sure we knew exactly what we were focusing on before we started it. So one workshop that we've just finished running, we're going to offer a couple more dates, was all focused on emotions. How crucial is a discussion about emotions now, especially as we're during a pandemic? We are experiencing a collective experience throughout the world, different variations on it, but everyone's in their shared community. And it's a good opportunity for us to really delve deep into about how we talk about our emotions and how vulnerable we are. So we've come up with a bunch of digital activities that focus on how we discuss emotions. So that's all on our website. Yeah.
Amazing. That's really cool. All right. We'll pop a link to that in the show notes as well. Now, in terms of your personal preparation and how you show up to your workshops, do you do anything like, do you have a special morning ritual to get you prepared? Do you get in early? Do you have like a special drink? What does that look like for you to get sort of in state?
So we actually had an episode on our podcast that was all about facilitation nerves. And the reason I say that is because this is not necessarily the best information new people want to hear, especially if they're people who get nervous before programming, but that doesn't necessarily go away. So I am still nervous before every program, but what I do to prepare is, one, I write out not a super detailed minute by minute agenda, but I do have an agenda that I do have times on them, often in like the 5 minute or the 10 minute gap. So it allows me to know what's coming next.
Yeah.
But I also throw in one activity at the start, which I refer to as my golden activity. And what I mean by that is an activity that I know so well that despite my nerves, I can run and facilitate really well. And it has multiple parts to it that for me help. One is it's a script that's easy to understand. So it's like a framing that's very simple, very short. It's a relatively energizing activity most of the time. So it's going to engage people really early on. And then the other part is I have some jokes or some humor that I have aligned in the middle of it. Maybe I've got a phrase. If people came to repeat workshops with me, they would hear the same joke sometimes. But the reason I do that is, for me, humor, a group laughing alleviates the tension. So if I can add that really early in, it gets rid of my nerves. It gets rid of maybe awkward tension between the group. They don't really know what we're doing. And I always do that activity before I've done any introductions, any names, any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've changed. When you're first learning as a facilitator and you're doing team development work, you often learn the same series of activities. And it's like, you're going to do a name game, icebreakers, that kind of stuff, initiatives, problem solving. You're going to go into that kind of sequence. I shake that up a bit. I'm not a huge fan of doing things in that specific order. I normally don't do names until 20, 30 minutes into a program. I just think it's worthwhile just to engage in activity rather than go do the round robin of people's names or say your name in a superpower and all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't find those are helpful. I think everyone's in their own head worrying about their own answer. They're not really focused on anyone else.
Definitely.
The aim is to learn names, that's not achieving it. And if the aim is to not highlight someone, you're doing a bad job because you're pointing out people and asking them to speak. So do something where they have the choice of opting in at their own level of opt-in. They can do what they want. You're not highlighting anyone, but your script is well identified. You've done it so many times that you can't get it wrong, and has some humor. Those are, for me, helps me with my programming every single time.
I love that. Yeah. Just the golden activity, I think, is awesome. So what a great tip for listeners is like, what is your golden activity? Something that's just reliable. And completely agree with you about mixing it up in that name game at the beginning. It's like, oh, people are really cold. Like, they haven't even warmed up and it's a new room. Like, I even get nervous if I'm a participant and it's coming around to me. Like you said, Phil, I'm thinking about my intro and not listening at all to what anyone else is saying. So I think that's a really good lesson, is like, what are you uncomfortable with in other people's workshops? And maybe try to avoid that or do something a little bit different. So do you have like a favorite icebreaker that you use, a favorite question?
Yeah, so
go-to?
my go-to activity is called jump in, jump out. It's often, or sometimes referred to as left in, and left, right, in, out, or there's the variations on it. Essentially, what you're doing is with your group is you're guiding them through a series of commands, and there are multiple rounds. So in the first round, I will give the command left, right, in, or forwards, or backwards. So when I say either of those, what you need to do is, jump in, jump out, jump left, jump right. You get that right in terms of the way I'm framing it. That's my golden activity. I messed up this stuff. But the way I frame it is, I'll give you one of those commands and you just have to follow along with me. So if I say jump in, you jump in towards the center of the circle. If I say jump out, you jump out, jump left, and jump right. What I really like about using it now, so if anyone's thinking of like in person now doing it, I've actually slightly changed the framing to relate to distance in terms of COVID protocol. So if you know that people have to be 6 feet or 2 meters or whatever is apart from each other, have people start in a circle that distance. Now, if you do this activity, now you remind people to be aware of distance. So if someone makes a mistake, they come too close to someone. So it's a good awareness of our distance. Get really aware of it as we play the activity. So experientially, we're learning about distance. In the original version, everyone would be relatively close and people would know if they've made a mistake because they would jump into each other. So it's very like that added a layer of humor to it as well. So the first round is just jump in, jump out, jump left, jump right. Second round is what I have them do is say what I say, but I want them to do the opposite. Say what I say, but do the opposite. So if I say jump in, I want them to shout jump in,
but jump back.
Jump out. Yep. And then that third round, I want them to do what I tell them to do, but I want them to shout the opposite. So do what I tell you to do and shout the opposite. So 3 different rounds, but what I like about it, there's good moments of humor throughout it as people make error. So you can talk about what it's like to make mistakes. But I also like that there's complete opt-in in what we're doing. It's relatively simple for them to follow, but there's also going to be a part where they mess up and it does get confusing. So you get to talk about that. Once again, leading to COVID protocols, these additional rounds, I relate them to changes in protocols, right? Like, so as we've been experiencing this last year, things have changed and our ability to adapt to change has been either good or bad. So this is an opportunity for us to experience that once again in the activity. You've just got used to something. I'm going to swap it out, change it. How are we going to react to that? Ask the question, how do people feel? When I say the instructions, do people groan? Yeah, because you're not going to be excited about it. But we repeat, and the more we repeat, the better you get. So it's all about learning outcomes that way too. So that for me would be pretty much my golden activity, jump in, jump out. And I think that it works for me. And I keep saying the for me part, because as a trainer of facilitation skills and also activities, one of the number one things I say at the start of a program when I'm teaching is, if you don't like something I'm going to do not do it yourself.
Yeah.
If you see me do something and you go, ooh, I don't like it, You're not obligated in any way to do it. And in fact, it would be to your detriment to try it, because it won't work for your authentic style. Like there's stuff I do that works for me, and I can play along with it. And I like to add in that humor. If you're a more serious facilitator and humor doesn't necessarily come naturally, don't try to add in a joke, because it's not going to land. So try to adapt to your own style and figure out whatever activity is going to work for you in those moments.
Yeah, I like that key phrase, for me. And that's what I hope when people listen to this podcast and your podcast as well. It's like picking up what you like and also recognizing like, oh, I don't like that. It's like, that's fine. You don't need to incorporate it in, maybe explore that. Like, what does that mean for you? So I'd imagine a bit of reflection is key as well. Phil, the work that you do is awesome. I love that activity that you shared, and also how you think about facilitation and it as a profession, the word around it, team experiences. You've got a wealth of knowledge. Where can we sort of share your podcast and website and everything about you? Where should people go if they want to connect?
Yeah, absolutely. I always love people reaching out. So that's how I ended up in the field, because I reached out to people and asked for advice. So please do so for me. You can email me at pbrown@high5, that's HIGH, the number 5, adventure.org. That's also our website, high5adventure.org. And our podcast is called Vertical Playpen. It's in relationship to a challenge course element, and it's all focused on experiential education and adventure education. So if you have interest in that facilitation world, check us out.
Amazing. Hopefully, you've got a few people sent your way listening to your amazing show and the work that you do. Phil, it's been awesome to reconnect. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you too, Leanne. Thank you. You're doing great stuff.